you tell someone you'll buy, and suddenly they're like, okay, you're going to be up for it right away. And it's like, no. No, I'm now definitely not up for it at all because you've just reacted like that. Bonjour tout le monde, bienvenue épisode 3 de Good You Can Do. You have no idea, and I'm not going to go into it right now, how long it took me to get set up to record tonight. Sometimes I just cannot get my stuff together. But let's move on from my brain's failure to operate normally and get into having a little chat about what's been happening this week. So I mentioned in the last episode that I was going to a protest for Wellington Cup Day against horse racing, of course, and I'll tell you a little bit about how that went. I really enjoyed it until we found out that a horse was killed that day, which obviously is something that isn't surprising at all. But, you know, it's still really sad whenever that happens, and that little bit more so when you realise that you were just right outside when that was happening to that poor animal who deserved so much better than to be used in this cruel industry. I did mention in the last episode that it was going to be a silent protest. Now, actually, there was quite a lot of heckling directed at us by passing members of the public, so it definitely wasn't silent, but not because of us. Okay, so all the people that worried about activism being shouty, like, sometimes you're not shouting, but other people are, and I get that that's something that can put people off, and that's totally fair enough. My favourite heckle of the day was this car went past. They were obviously going to the races and they'd obviously been pre-drinking, and this guy leans out the car and says, and kind of relevant comment to the topic of today's show, the main topic of today's show, the guy leans out of the car and he says, "Get a life, you homos." And so first off, I'm thinking like, okay, so we're using homophobia to defend our perpetuation of animal cruelty. Classy, very classy. But also I was like, get a life? That's an interesting choice of comment because, you know, to me being there was me doing exactly that. You know, I'm doing things like this to create a life for myself that is fulfilling for me, and is also more enjoyable for me. It's not that I think that like it's fun to have to do these things, you know, I'd rather there was nothing to protest about, but I mean, if it wasn't this, it would be something else, right? So, you know, it's not enjoyable in that sense, but it is enjoyable to interact with people and to feel like you're contributing to something positive in the world, or at least trying to. And so I was like, that's what I'm doing, bro. Like, the fact that you think you have to not care about stuff like this in order to have fun is what is sad to me. You think that there's this attitude of like people that are trying to kind of talk about things like this and they make that a part of their lives, don't also have fun. And it's just silly because of course we do, but also we're taking some time to focus on something that's not so fun. And to me, that's not having a life. So I just found that such an interesting comment. Something I didn't mention in last week's episode when I talked about like positive reasons from a selfish perspective to get involved with activism is the connection that you make with other vegans or other people who care about insert whatever issue you're getting involved with. And I think, especially for vegans though, one of the hardest things about it is that it can be very isolating. You know, a lot of other social causes, there might not be many other people that are doing activism for that cause, but you'll probably find that when you tell people that that's something that you do, or that that's something that you believe in, people will be like, yeah, that's great. And they're not maybe going to join you in the activism, but they think it's a really great thing for you to be doing. Whereas with just like even being vegan, sometimes it's something that, you know, people, they're not necessarily going to commend you for. If you kind of talk about it too much, it's going to be a problem. So many people go vegan and then go back to not being vegan. And I'm not one of those people that thinks that people that do that were never vegan, like they never truly cared about animals or anything like that, because I think it seems totally possible that somebody could become a vegan for ethical reasons and then have such a bad experience doing so for whatever reason that essentially motivated reasoning goes on for them. So they have a motivation to find reasons to not be vegan anymore. So, you know, information they come across that seems to not support veganism, they'll be more inclined to believe it. So, for example, it's quite common to see these articles talking about how bad soy is for the environment. And of course, we all know that the rebuttal to that is like, well, yeah, you know, soy's not great for the environment, but most of it is produced as animal feed. And so if we just didn't have these animals in such high numbers to produce food, then the soy production would decrease drastically. So this whole issue with soy is actually a reason to be vegan as opposed to not be. But if you were having a really bad time being vegan and you felt like your relationships were getting really damaged and people were turning against you and you just felt really lonely and isolated, you would be motivated to not look into the rebuttal in the way that, because I'm motivated to stay vegan, right? So I see something like that and I admit I have a bias where I want to find out, okay, what's the argument against this? And luckily it turns out to be good, but, you know, there's definitely a risk that in cases where it wasn't such a strong argument, you'd still lean on it because you want to. But for them, they might kind of go towards the other side. So all I'm saying is, if you don't have any vegan friends, which I don't, well, I do have like a friend that is vegan, but she's not a close friend. Not for any reason. I would be close friends with her. We just haven't like spent a lot of time together. There's nothing, you know, there's no reason why I wouldn't be. But she's also just not very like into veganism, if that makes sense. Like it's not something that she would kind of talk about a lot, or she's very like chill about it, much more so than I am. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just that when I get into believing in a certain worldview, I become like all about it. And not everyone is like that, obviously. So I want to like talk about it with everybody. Even if they disagree, I want to argue about it in a respectful way. And that's actually a way that I bond with people, is debating things. And sometimes it's quite problematic because people can sometimes feel like your relationship has been damaged if you've had a disagreeing kind of conversation about something. Whereas I'm actually like, no, this is how I bond. I love this. I still totally love you. And I'm really glad that we got to have this discussion about where we're coming from with a certain issue and why. And even if we go away thinking differently, I'm loving that we've had this convo. Obviously, there are some disagreements where like it's not just disagreement anymore. It's like, no, I'm not going to be friends with someone who believes certain things. But yeah. So anyway, all I'm saying is if you don't have any vegan friends, it's really good to join groups like this, like local activism groups or local, just even something really chill like a vegan potluck group that some places have. It's great to join these things because obviously you'll meet other like-minded people, and hopefully you can develop some friendships out of that and not feel so isolated and like you're the only vegan in the village. So another thing that happened last week is that I mentioned on social media, not all of my social media, just on my Instagram. Twitter will be the one that's a bit harder for me to mention because I have more people following me on there and I have people on there that are differently minded as well. But I mentioned on my Instagram for the first time that this podcast exists. And I wasn't planning to do that until I'd gotten like 4 or 5 episodes out, so that if anyone came along to listen, they would see a range of episodes and kind of get more of a well-rounded idea of what the show is going to be. But I kind of couldn't resist doing it. I just thought, let's just do it. Who cares? We'll get into promoting it like more properly when there are more episodes out, but let's just like let a few people know that it exists. But now I'm like, oh no, there are a small number of people listening now, and I still have a list of like 50, 60 things that I want to improve on. But hey, it is what it is, so I gotta roll with it now. Another thing I wanted to chat about briefly before we get into the main topic of this show, and it is kind of related, is this sex toy thing with Zoella. So, I have known of Zoella, or Zoe Sugg as she prefers to go by now, as a like 30-year-old woman, back in 2012, and I wasn't a follower or fan of hers, but, you know, I kind of would hear things about what she was up to from kind of then to 2014-15, when she was a really big deal on YouTube. And there are definitely quite a number of things she's done in the past that I didn't totally approve of, but as I was reading through this whole sex toy exam thing, I was like, go Zoe, I'm loving how you're handling this, like, you know, very good. So a brief rundown of what happened for those who don't know, and I'll put some stuff on Instagram that will kind of show you more examples of what I'm talking about. By the way, if you can hear any weird noises in the background, it's my cat playing with stuff now. I have to just deal with it for now. In future recordings, my husband, he will be back living with me in a few weeks, and I'll be able to sort of lock her out of this room while I'm recording. But for now, I don't want to force her to be alone, so I kind of have to just deal with it. She's quite needy, and yeah, if I do shut the door on her and leave her outside, she'll just yowl outside the door, basically. So, you know, you can take her rustling some papers around that she likes to play with, or you can take the yowling. I know I personally want to go with the rustling. So, the Zoella thing. It's really hard for me to not say Zoella, I'm sorry. I know she prefers to go by Zoe these days, so I'm gonna try. But, like, the Zoella thing is very deeply in the brain. Anyway, so what happened is that, unbeknownst to Zoe, some piece of content from her website that she runs. Now, this website is written in kind of a blog/magazine style format by a team of women. It's not just her writing everything. Some piece of content from there was being used in exams in the UK. And then I guess some parents went on her website for themselves and they found an article where her team was talking about different sex toys that had been big sellers over the year. And these parents complained to whatever board decides what goes in the syllabus, and then they decided, okay, we're going to take this piece of her website, which wasn't the sex toy thing, it was something else that I can't recall what it was. They were like, we're going to take this out of the exams because, you know, it's like not appropriate that also on this website there's content about sex toys. Now, I don't know how this got into the media, but then Zoe, having not even known that her content was being used, wakes up to see this coverage in the media of like, oh my gosh, Zoella's been dropped from the exam syllabus. And she's like, huh? What? I wasn't even in there. I didn't even know about this. And all these articles had a tone of like, naughty Zoella, talking about sex. And there was kind of an implication that her content was aimed at teenagers, whereas nowadays it's kind of aimed at people in their 20s. So she was like, that's not even like a valid criticism in terms of what my content is aimed at. And if they looked throughout the rest of the website, they'd find all this content that's clearly aimed at adults, like content talking about fertility and just relationships in general from an adult perspective. One of the articles even said that she got dropped after a YouTube video talking about sex toys, and like it wasn't a YouTube video, like I said, it was on her website. And yeah, I just hate that because like obviously people read that and think like, yeah, it was a YouTube video, and that paints a completely different picture than if it was on her website. Like, I mean, there wouldn't be anything wrong with her making a YouTube video about sex toys if that's what she wanted to do anyway. But it is different, you know, it would probably go to a younger audience. But it's different, like her personally doing a video where it's her talking does come across differently than a group of kind of nameless women just generically saying like, here's a bit of information about some sex toys that sold really well this year, you know. In reaction to this, Zoe posted a bunch of stories explaining the situation and like the real story behind it in terms of who her website's actually aimed at, what actually happened, and also saying, but hey, even if this article had been aimed at teenagers, I don't really think that would have been a problem because, spoiler alert, women, including teenaged women, masturbate and have a right to know about their bodies, to know how to experience pleasure, whether that be from themselves or with somebody else. You know, they should know what gives them that, and they should be comfortable with their bodies, and they should feel like that is something that they have a right to expect. And she was talking about how teenagers tend to kind of already know about these things, and so providing them with factual info on how they can explore these things in a safe way isn't a bad thing. And I totally agree with that. So I was just watching these stories like, yes, I can't believe I am actually like low-key standing Zoella today. And kind of relevant is that I recently bought a sex toy for the first time in a very, very long time. It's not my first time literally ever buying a sex toy, but my experience with them is extremely, extremely limited. So I bought this toy and I have tried it a total of 1 times. So I can't necessarily say that I have a full verdict to give on it yet. I may have to do a blog post on it, you know, a little review post in the future. But on this one occasion, I kind of thought, I don't think I'm into this. I don't think this is my thing. Now, this particular toy is designed to be able to be used by people with any kind of genitalia, and it's also designed to be able to use with a partner. I was alone on this one occasion, obviously. I just mentioned that my husband is not living with me at the moment, and I do not currently have any side pieces, nor do I think I could fit such a luxury into my life at the moment. So yeah, it was just me. So I will have to give it the test with someone else before I totally write off the whole idea. But yeah, I was like, I don't think I'm into this. But the problem is, I want to be. Like, not this particular toy necessarily, but I want to be a person that has tried a lot of different things and has opinions on a lot of different things. So yeah, if any of you guys have recommendations on toys, I will gladly accept them, because the way I chose this toy was literally just, I went onto a website and there was a bunch of different things that I am curious about and wanted to see what I would think of. So I literally just made a list of all the things and I randomly selected something from it, and then I bought that thing. So I don't really have much of a strategy here with what I'm kind of trying to try out. So yeah, recommendations would be gratefully accepted, and not guaranteeing I'll act on them, but definitely take them under advisement. To move on, today's topic is bisexuality and biphobia, and specifically my experience of like fully embracing being bisexual, and also my experience of internalized biphobia, because that's a thing that we dealt with and probably are still dealing with to some extent, but definitely not so much as in the past. But I wanted to start out by talking about some statistics that I found. I thought let's do a lot of research on this and kind of what are attitudes towards bisexuality, how do bi people feel about being bi, all these kinds of things. And I found out some pretty shocking and some not so shocking stuff. So there will be some very brief discussion of rape, domestic violence, sexual harassment, and suicide in this part of the episode. So if that's something you don't want to listen to right now or ever, that's totally fine. You can jump out right now, or alternatively, I will put timestamps below for the times that you can avoid. Okay, let's get into the statistics. So bisexual people are way less likely to be out than gay and lesbian people. Pew Research did a study of LGBT Americans in 2013, and they found that 96% of gay men and 94% of lesbians had told at least one close friend about their orientation, but only 79% of bisexuals had. And then gay and lesbian people were also a lot more likely to say that most of the people important to them knew about their sexuality. 77% of gay men and 71% of lesbians say all or most people know, compared to just 28% of bisexuals. And we know that there is a big bisexual woman privilege compared to bi men, because significant differences also appear when you split this data by gender. 88% of bi women say that they have told a close friend, but just 55% of bi men have. A third of bi women said that most of the important people in their life know they're bi, but only 12% of bi men could say the same. And this bit doesn't surprise me too much, because if you're gay or lesbian and you're forming long-term relationships, unless you're completely in the closet and you are kind of covering up by having a relationship with somebody of a different gender to you, you're going to be having relationships with people of the same gender. So it's naturally going to come out that you're homosexual if you want to introduce your partner to colleagues, friends, family at any point. Whereas if you're bi, you might be in relationships with people of the same sex. And so the topic of sexuality actually has to come up in conversation, usually for you to tell people, you know, if you are a gay man and you bring along your boyfriend to an event, and, you know, just by you introducing him, it's clear to everyone that you're in a same-sex relationship, and that that's a thing that you look for. Whereas if you're bisexual, it's very easy to pass as straight. And if you're in a relationship with somebody of a different gender, the topic of your sexuality is going to actually have to come up in order for you to be able to make it known to people that you are bi. And a lot of the time, people that are in that situation are just going to let people presume that they're straight. I know that's definitely something that I have done. You know, I'll be having conversations about relationships with somebody, and I'll never jump in to be like, oh, you know, I wonder if this would be different with women, or like, you know, this thing happened with a woman, or anything like that. I just let them assume that I'm straight. The same survey found that 70% of gay men and 67% of gay women had told their mother about their sexuality, compared with only 40% of bisexuals. And again, there's a big difference between men and women, with it being 47% of bi women and just 22% of bi men. And it's not that, oh, maybe men would be more comfortable telling the parent of the same gender, because actually only 8% of bi men have told their father and 29% of bi women have. So in general, people are more likely to tell their mother about their sexuality than their father. And bi people being less likely to tell their parents doesn't surprise me either, for exactly the reasons I outlined before, because if you're in a relationship with someone of a different gender, it's so easy to just avoid the conversation. And it's definitely a form of privilege, and the data does seem to bear this out, because when asked how hard it was to tell their parents, Bisexuals were much less likely to report that it was difficult, so they're less likely to have told their parents, but when they do, they find it less difficult. 52% of them said that it wasn't difficult to tell their mother, versus 33% of lesbian women and 36% of gay men. And I wonder how often the parent's reaction is less negative or even just less shocked. In many cases, perhaps at the time when they come out to the parent, the child is already in a relationship with someone of a different gender, and so the parents are kind of like, is this really going to affect either of us a whole lot? And I know for me, I still haven't actually had a coming out moment with my parents, but I'm pretty sure they know I'm bi because I occasionally post things on social media that heavily imply that I am. And yeah, I'm sure if I asked them what they thought, they'd be like, yeah, I know. But I've never had that coming out moment. But I only started openly kind of referring to myself as bi and posting things that would imply that after I had been in a relationship with a man for some time. So, I wonder if they would even view my bisexuality as valid, because maybe they're like, oh, it's really easy for her to just say this and it to just be a thing that she's kind of saying for clout or some bullshit like that, which is a problem. But yeah, they don't know about any experiences that I've had with women, because that's not something that I would tell them about. So, because that would bring up a whole other conversation regarding my, relationship with my husband. So that's not somewhere I've ever gone. So yeah, but also, even if they're totally on board with it being completely valid, they would think well, she's married to a man, so unless they were to break up and she were to start dating women, which we don't anticipate happening, it's not really going to affect either of us in any way. So it's nothing for me to worry about. Not that there's actually anything to worry about. But I think even a lot of parents who have nothing but the best of intentions would have worries about their child facing stigma from something like their sexual orientation. So I'm sure it is sometimes a relief to feel like perhaps they're not going to experience that. Anyway, I've linked a report on this Pew study below, and I really recommend having a look through it if you're interested, because there's a lot of stuff that I haven't gone into and a bunch of quotes from some of the participants, so yeah, check that out. Now onto the stuff that really did surprise me, and that was that bisexual Americans were found to be more likely to experience disparities in employment and experiencing violence and in poor health outcomes. And there's a whole report on this that I read through, and there's also one from the UK where they found some similar statistics. I've linked both of these down in the description below, but just for the purposes of this recording, I'm going to refer specifically to the stats from the American report. But bi men and women are more likely to live in poverty than gay and lesbian people, which I'm not exactly sure why that is, but they are, and they're also a lot more likely to experience intimate partner violence than gay, lesbian, or straight people. At the time the research was carried out, 46% of bi women had experienced rape, compared to 13% of lesbian women and 17% of straight women. And I wonder how much of that disparity is due to the sexualization of bisexuality. So this idea that bi women are hypersexual and therefore perhaps predatory men are more likely to perceive them as actually wanting it, because there's this idea that bi women are always up for it. When you ask, have you experienced rape, physical violence, or stalking by an intimate partner, it goes up to 61% of bi women compared to 43% of lesbian and 35% of straight women. And in saying that, bi men also report higher rates of sexual violence than their gay or straight male counterparts. So there's one individual, a woman named Faith, who is quoted in this report, and her experience absolutely speaks to what I'm talking about in terms of bisexual women being perceived as hypersexual. She says, "Nearly every single time I've come out as a bisexual woman in the workplace, I've experienced severe sexual harassment. Co-workers have made inappropriate jokes, made sexual advances, and shown me sexually graphic photos. I brought such concerns to my employer's human resources department, but received little, if any, support. One told me that I brought harassment upon myself simply because I was out. Another said that my experience didn't qualify as sexual harassment because I am bisexual." I just read that and I'm like, how dare you? How fucking dare you suggest that somebody's sexuality is a reason that they can't experience sexual harassment? Like, what? I should also mention that Faith is a black woman, and there's also a stereotype about black women being hypersexual. So both of these identities are building upon each other and reinforcing each other and presumably making it even worse for her. Bisexuals were also found to be 4 times more likely to attempt suicide than straight adults, with gay men and women being 2 times more likely, and for bi men only, it's 6 times more likely than straight adults. And despite this, bisexual people are less likely than homosexual people to be out to their healthcare providers. A bi man is quoted in this report, and he talks about going to get an HIV test, and the doctor asks, all the kind of typical questions about his sexual history, and specifically he starts off by asking about his sexual history with women. And so this guy, he has had a sexual history with women, so he answers the questions. And then no questions about his sexual history with men come up. The doctor just assumes, because he answered my questions about women, that must mean that he's a straight guy, so I'm going to move on with carrying out the test. And it's very easy for us to say, bro, you should have said after that, and last week I slept with a dude, or whatever. But I'm sure many of us can remember a time when we've been to see a doctor, and maybe not even about something as sensitive as getting tested for a sexually transmitted illness or talking about our sexuality, but I'm sure many of us can remember a time when we were wondering if the doctor would ask something and thinking they probably should, but then they didn't, and so at the time we thought they would have, and then, we say things to ourselves like, oh, what do I know? I'm the patient here. The doctor is probably just going to bring it up a bit later and I should wait until they do. Or does it really even matter if I mention this or not, because they're just going to give me the test either way anyway? So, yeah, he should have mentioned that he also had a sexual history with men at that point. But we can't be judgmental about it because we all so often don't respond to situations exactly the way we ideally would. We've all had those conversations where afterwards we're like, damn, I should have said this, I should have asked about that. So, I know you have. So, on to my personal experiences. As a kid, it took me a long time to realize that I was maybe attracted to the same gender because, and now just in the last 10 or so years, our conception of gender identity and what different genders can do or should be able to do has come so far in terms of, in general society, what is considered the normal, what's considered okay, what's mocked, what's not mocked, has come so far that if any younger people are listening, this might sound a bit strange, but when I was a kid, a tween, something that was very commonly said was it's very normal for girls to talk about finding other girls pretty or beautiful, all these kinds of things. But if a guy was to acknowledge that oh yeah, that guy is really handsome or attractive or good looking, whatever, that would be considered a bit weird and considered potentially a sign of him being gay, all these silly things like that. So when I thought that other girls were pretty, I just thought that was totally normal. And over time, I started to realize there was a difference between, there were women who I would think were beautiful, but I wouldn't have any kind of attraction towards them at all. And then there were people who might be, objectively speaking, even though beauty is a subjective thing, but when I say objectively speaking, I'm talking about if we were to do some kind of poll of society and say who do you think's more beautiful, this person or this person, or what features do you consider attractive or unattractive, and we were to take what a majority opinion was, and obviously that's going to differ a little bit country to country, but if wherever you were to do that and take the majority opinion, that's what I'm talking about. So what is kind of the beauty standard of where you are? What would most people find attractive? So sometimes I would realize this person that I am thinking about is actually less beautiful than this other woman that I also think is very beautiful. But I feel more attracted to them. I feel more their particular way that they look appeals to me more. And it was in a different way. There was something extra about the way that I felt about it as opposed to just appreciating beauty. It wasn't just like, oh, that girl is really good looking, good for her, I wish I could look like that or something like that. There was something more to it. And it was a little bit additionally confusing for me because, not exclusively, but I do tend to have a type with women, and it does tend to be people that I would wish that I looked like, not exclusively, but there's definitely a type that is kind of my ideal in terms of what I'm attracted to, and also kind of what I would want to look like. It's very similar. So I was like, am I just admiring them in a sort of admiring way where I'm like, oh, I'd love to look like that, or is there something more? And so it took me a while to kind of fully realize yep, there is definitely something more to it. There's definitely an attraction there. And then the other thing that kind of came in and complicated it for me is that, as we know, there is this stereotype of kind of doing things with girls for male attention. And I totally played into that. And I wanted the male attention, and that was something that I purposely did. So I was the girl that at parties would hook up with other girls for male attention. And I knew I was doing it for that reason, and it was actually more about that to me than it was about the girl. Now, in some cases, I was attracted to the girl, but I wasn't thinking about it from that perspective. That was kind of just a bonus, because I was never thinking, oh, I might end up dating this girl. The idea of dating a girl was never something that I conceived of as possible for me, something that I would, that would be an avenue that I would go down. So I was never thinking, let's actually try to authentically create a romantic or sexual connection with a girl in an authentic way that is about me and her, because I was like, it's never going to go anywhere. So, I'm not going to do that. Whereas I did want things to go somewhere with guys. That was what I conceived of as my, future in dating. And also because there's this stereotype of bi women being more sexual, that's another reason why I did it, because I thought it will make me come across to guys as more sexual, and that will appeal to the guys. And if anyone listens to Dan Savage's Savage Lovecast, he has this phrase that he refers to on there where he says that he encourages people to be GGG, and what that stands for is good, giving, and game. So it means being good at things that you do sexually, so kind of perfecting your technique at certain things, being giving, so being generous, and being game, so if your partner suggests something, that you're game to give things a go. And I obviously hadn't listened to this podcast when I was in intermediate and high school, but in my head, that kind of persona of being that type of person was something that I really wanted to cultivate as a personal brand. I wanted guys to think that I was that type of person. And I'm not saying it's bad to be that type of person at all. I do agree with him that in a relationship it is a good thing to be, but I very much wanted that to be my image, and I used hooking up with girls at parties and things to help try and create that for myself. So, I was always am I actually attracted to these people, or is it just all about trying to appeal to the gender that I am actually attracted to? So eventually I realized, okay, no, I think this is genuine. I really am attracted to women, and I would be totally up for being with them in a situation where, there's no possibility of it gaining attention from guys, and it's not about that at all, and it's just about me and her. So even though I had sort of realized that I wasn't out about it, I had a few friends that I mentioned the fact to, yep, I'd be, up for it with women, and yeah, so this was mentioned, but I never was kind of identifying as bi, because I always felt like I had more of an attraction to men, and so at the time, I didn't realize that you can be bi regardless of whether it's like an equal 50-50 split, or it's more in one direction or another. I didn't realize that back then. So I thought the fact that I felt like I had more attraction to men meant that, I wasn't bi. But it was just like, maybe I would have sex with a woman at some stage. So there was that. And I now do think that it's equal anyway, but at the time I didn't realize that. And I thought that, like, unless it was equal, it wasn't valid, and it was, like, some form of being straight, which doesn't make a ton of sense. But anyway, that was the thought process there. So, yeah, I wasn't identifying as bi. And I also had a lot of biphobia towards men, which I think is so much more common than people having it towards women. And yeah, obviously really not proud of the fact that I had these attitudes towards men being bi, but I was always like, my husband would love the idea of me getting with another woman. But if I was to find out that he was doing something with another guy, that would be a turn off to me. And somehow I thought the fact that it was a turn off would mean that it wouldn't have been okay, which is very strange because that's not, that's not fair. And I now feel like if that was a thing that happened, I actually would like it, because I am a person that experiences a lot of compersion, and, if I find the guy attractive, especially, I'm going to be like, yes, okay, you do you if that's the thing that you want to do. But at the time I was like, no, I definitely would not be into that, and that's not a thing I'd be cool with. Like if my husband had said, I'm bi, or I want to, I'm referring to him as my husband, even though I'm talking about when we were very young, because we've been dating since we were like 16. But yeah, if he had come to me and said, I am having like feelings for guys or attractions to other guys, I would have been like, I don't know if I would have been rude about it per se, but I definitely wouldn't have been as cool about it as I would have expected people to be towards me feeling the same way about women, which is obviously not great. But over time, I don't really know why. I think it's just been being exposed to more by men, like seeing more of them out there doing their thing. Over time, I realized, like, no, they're the exact same as I am, except men, duh. Like, there's no difference between it. They're not more likely to eventually decide that they're homosexual than I am. They're not more likely to cheat in relationships than I am, etc., etc. I realized there was no reason for me to have any of these kinds of negative feelings, and I also realized that I potentially could be turned on by it. Not that that matters at all, but that's a thing that was part of my thought process. But yeah, I was just like, there's no issue with this whatsoever. What am I talking about? I'm cool with it. So we got there. And then I guess a little bit after that, I started identifying as bi. And even at this stage, I thought, I'm hetero-romantic though. I'd only want to be in romantic relationships with men. And I felt very strongly for a while, like there's no way that I could be in a romantic relationship with a woman. And then just over the last 4 or 5 years, I've realized, like, why not? Why would I even say that? I have no reason to say that, because the whole reason why I thought that, it wasn't for any real reason. It was just because I didn't have a clear picture from my younger days of what me dating a woman would be like. There was no kind of map or script that seemed relatable to me of how that would work. I mean, I knew a lesbian couple when I was a child, but neither of them were femme, and I was always very femme. And so it's silly because it doesn't matter in terms of whether you'd have a relationship with someone or not, but I just thought there's no relatable picture that I have seen in media or in real life of how a femme bi couple would work. And so I never kind of imagined it for myself. It's something that's talked about a lot with representation. It's actually something that's helped me understand complaints about representation in other areas more, because I had times in the past where I was like, well, it shouldn't really matter if you see characters that are the same race as you, or the same gender as you, or the same whatever as you in certain roles or not. That shouldn't really affect whether or not you, like if you've never seen for example, a character of the same ethnicity as you in a certain job, that shouldn't make it less likely for you to go into that job, because if you want to go into that job, go into that job. And now I totally get it, because sometimes it's just hard to imagine yourself in a certain position if you've never seen any example of it. And that's not true for everyone, but I can certainly see how it makes it less likely. Because all the bi characters that I had seen in media at that point were cases where it was very like, it's an experiment, it's a rebellious phase. It was never a thing of like, we're having a serious long-term relationship, or even shorter term, but it's serious and it's romantic, and it's not done as part of a phase. It's just done because I connected with somebody. Like, a storyline that comes to mind was the Marissa and, was the girl called Alex? I want to say Alex, the one played by Olivia Wilde. Their little fling on the OC was very much played as like this rebellious phase, at least on the part of Marissa. And for the other girl, it was like, she's from out of town and, you know, she's a bit alternative and different from the rest. So it just didn't seem like something that matched up with me at the time. I never saw this kind of like, we're just a normal couple being normal and doing normal things. And then there's also the fact that when the option of going out with someone of a different gender is available, then it's so easy to just be like, I'm just going to do that then, because like I'm just as much attracted to men, and, you know, I can easily be attracted to and love them. So why would I risk opening myself up to any kind of stigma that might come from being in a same-sex relationship when I could just be with men? So I kind of fell into that trap. So yeah, after realizing this and realizing that I didn't really have any reason to say that I was heteroromantic, I was like, actually, you know what? I would totally give a relationship that was more than just a sexual relationship with a woman a go. Why not? The other kind of thing that comes up with bisexual people is this fear that we are more likely to cheat in relationships than people who are straight or purely same-sex attracted. And it's just so silly because, like I said before, I'm not attracted to most people out there in the world, and I think most people are not attracted to most people. There's like certain particular people that you find attractive for most of us. And also, the way I see it is that there's essentially 3 spectrums. Probably more, but I generally think of 3 spectrums, with one being sexual orientation, the Kinsey scale, essentially, where you've got homosexuality at one end and heterosexuality at the other end, and then it's like, where do you fall along here? And that's the gender of people that you're attracted to. Which genders are you attracted to? And then there's another scale, which is like the monogamy versus non-monogamy scale. So at one end, you're going to have people who very much need the security of knowing that they are in a monogamous relationship, and they potentially also get jealous more easily, and they're going to want to set more boundaries around their relationship in terms of what is considered as cheating. You know, that can get to a very extreme level, or it can just be what we would kind of think of as the normal relationship and things that most people would probably construe as cheating. And then on the other end, you have people who completely, like, they only want to have completely open relationships or polyamory. And then you have the area where I kind of sit, which is non-monogamy. So never say never. It's something I might potentially get into in the future. Who knows, really? Like, let's see what happens in life. But I find it difficult to see myself in a polyamorous situation where I have multiple partners who are all kind of equal in importance to each other. But what I do feel very comfortable with is having a primary relationship with someone that's like a life partner, and then also having like a sexual or sexual and romantic relationship with other people on the side, and maybe that's shared with you and the partner, or maybe that's separate, but that's something that goes on for a period of time. It may be a very long period of time, or it may be a very short period of time. Either way is fine. It's just about sort of enjoying a connection with somebody else for as long as it makes sense to have that. And that's something that like kind of makes me be like, I'm probably not the best person to defend the bis from the allegations of like not being cheaty, but it's also not cheaty, it's ethical non-monogamy, it's called, which is where, you know, everyone knows what's going on. And there's also people that have like don't ask, don't tell arrangements where you know that each other could be out there doing whatever or doing whatever you've agreed to, but you don't talk about the details of it. That doesn't appeal to me because also on the other end of the spectrum is compersion, which is when a partner has a positive romantic or sexual experience with somebody else and you feel happy about them and you enjoy hearing about it. Not necessarily it can be in a sexual way, but not necessarily. It may just be being happy for them. And I'm very much like that. So for me, don't ask, don't tell kind of arrangement just wouldn't work. But anyway, this is all totally irrelevant to this discussion, but just to say, potentially I'm not the best one to be defending us here. And then the other spectrum that I think about is the socio-sexuality spectrum. So on one end of that, we have people who are what some people call demisexual, which is where you have to have a really strong romantic bond with someone before you want to or are willing to have sex with them, all the way along to people who like they can want to have sex with someone they've just met, they're totally down like right away. And I'm definitely not at that end, but I'm more towards it than towards the other end. So again, not the best person to defend us. But the issue that bisexuals have is that people tend to assume that we are much further towards that very socio-sexual end than we are, because we are just as likely to fall at any point along the spectrum as anybody else. As far as I know, I haven't seen any research on it, but like, you know, you're going to find people, I don't know what the likelihood of different things are, but you're going to find people at all the points along it regardless. And so, yeah, I've definitely had experiences where you tell someone that you are bi and their demeanor towards you kind of changes a little bit, where they suddenly feel like, oh, something's going to be able to happen a lot sooner than they maybe thought previously, you know, and they'll pivot to right away being like, okay, so, you know, when is the sex happening kind of thing, let's do it. And I'm like, I don't even know if I'm attracted to you yet, okay? I'm someone that there doesn't need to be a romantic bond for sex, like with the socio-sexuality thing. Part of it that I forgot to mention is that it's kind of also about how decoupled sex and love are for you. So on the other end, sex and love are very intertwined for you, and whereas on the other end, it's like you could kind of have sex with somebody just as friends and no kind of weird romantic feelings are going to get brought up. I'm like that, but I'm not going to necessarily know, like I'm like that, but it will take me a while to work out potentially if I'm attracted to you or not. It can't just be like, oh, your facial features are all the kind that I sort of like and they all like look nice, you know what I mean? Like there has to be more to it than that. You kind of have to see if there's like a good vibe, or a little bit about what their personality is like, and if you're attracted to aspects of that, which I think is what most people are like. But yeah, sometimes you tell someone you're bi and suddenly they're like, okay, you're going to be up for it right away. And it's like, no, I'm now definitely not up for it at all because you've just reacted like that. So there's these spectrums, and as I said, bi people, we can fall along any point of it, but there's kind of an assumption that we're going to be at these extreme ends. And the most recent show I saw that demonstrated this to me was, do you guys remember Love is Blind? It feels like it came out like 2 or 3 years ago, but actually it was only the beginning of 2020 that season 1 of Love is Blind came out, and I can't remember their names, but I remember there was that one couple where the guy proposed, they meet up, they're at that resort, and he tells her that he is bisexual, and she freaks out, and I was so angry, despite the fact that like I had those kind of feelings before. I don't think I would have freaked out that badly as she did, but that's because I just have a much more low-key personality than her. It wouldn't have been because I didn't have any of the feelings. But watching it back now, just last year, I was so mad. I was like, how dare you? This guy, like, is totally, you know, just as masculine as anyone. He's just as likely to be faithful as anyone. Shut up. What are you talking about? But it was really cool, actually, to see the conversation that generated about this, because that's the type of thing that people who have attitudes like what I had need to see to kind of help them realize, like, no, these things that I think aren't really accurate at all. A channel on YouTube that I recommend checking out is called The Take. They do video essays about the depictions of gender roles in movies, and they do video essays about different tropes in film and television. And they also have a video on the portrayal of bisexuality in film and television, and I will link the video down below. Really recommend checking it out. It kind of goes over some recent and not so recent depictions of bisexuality and the way that media has reinforced these stereotypes. And they talked about quite a few shows that I haven't seen, and it was cool to see how things are improving quite a lot. But something they touched on in the video that I hadn't really thought about, but that I think does really suck. They spoke about how there've been some movies in the past where the character will be bi or seem to be bi, and they can assume this because in the film the character will be shown as having romantic and or sexual relationships with men and women, and, you know, they'll seem to be genuinely invested in and genuinely enjoying both relationships. It won't just be like the relationship with the woman is, you know, to cover up the fact that they're actually gay. It'll seem like a genuine thing that they're into. And then they'll also have a relationship with a man, and then media will talk about the movie as a gay movie, and they'll talk about the character as a gay character and kind of erase the bisexuality of that character. And yeah, you know, I would be fine with them describing them as a gay character if there was some scene in the movie where the character identified as gay, or the character referred to not being bi, or the character referred to, like, I was never really into insert name of woman that they were with. But when that doesn't happen, and then people are like, oh, this gay movie was so great, like, it's like, that guy was bi, could you have mentioned that, please? I got a message on Instagram that I want to read to you, because what I find really interesting about it is that I relate a lot to what she talks about in terms of the way that she's experienced internalized biphobia, even though we've had really different relationship experience. So she says, I'm a bi-hi femme in a relationship with a trans man, and because we pass as a straight cis couple, I struggle a lot with feeling queer enough. I guess I'm in a weird situation, re-internalized biphobia, because I previously only dated women and identified as a lesbian. I have experienced biphobia where people assume my relationships with women didn't really count. I also struggle to come out to new people because I'm worried they will think that I'm not really bi. I can totally relate to the experience of not feeling queer enough because you are a femme presenting person in a relationship with a man, and also feeling like if you mention it to other people, they're going to be like, that's not valid, you're in a relationship with a man, sweetie. Which is really silly. But yeah, like, I totally get it, and it's just interesting to me how we both feel this kind of internalized biphobia and worry about these things, despite, like, she's had relationships with women in the past. I haven't had romantic relationships with women in the past. She's identified as lesbian in the past. I never have identified as lesbian. So, like, that indicates to me, if it didn't already, that it's probably all bullshit. We're probably fine. We probably shouldn't worry about this stuff, because it's something that people with such different experiences can put onto themselves. And with the having previously only identified as lesbian thing, it reminds me of a friend I had back in high school who I used to say was going to end up gay. even though at some points they identified as bi. So this is another example of times when I myself displayed biphobia. And the reason why I said this is that he had some relationships with men and he had some relationships with women, and when he was with the women, he would identify himself as bi, and when he was with the guys, he would identify himself as gay. And he's in a relationship with a man nowadays. I don't know if he identifies as gay or bi. It doesn't matter. But back then I was like, I feel like you're kind of like not really into women. And so when you are with one, you kind of hedge your bets and say you're bi. And like, see, there's such a bi, like saying like bis are hedging their bets is such a biphobic way to speak about them. But that's how I thought of it. And when you're gay, you know, that's who you really are, so you just say I'm gay because that's what feels authentic to you. And like, you know, it's okay for people to identify as bi and then be like, actually I'm gay, or actually I'm straight, or vice versa. In this woman's case, it's okay to identify as lesbian and then be like, no, actually I'm bi, and to figure these things out. It's just the same as me thinking I was straight and then realizing, no, I'm not, I'm bi. It doesn't make it less valid if it goes in the other direction. And that's so frustrating that people would assume like your relationships with women in the past didn't count, they weren't genuine, they weren't real, because, you know, now you've found a guy and figured out where you're really meant to be, which is with a guy, of course. You know, it's so silly. Like, of course, those relationships that you had with women, like, I obviously don't know why they ended, but they began for a reason, and they continued for however long they continued for a reason, and it's not anyone's place to be like, oh, I see you're with a man now. Oh, I guess those relationships with women didn't count. Like, excuse me, I spent, you know, X amount of time in those relationships, and it's a part of who I am now. It definitely counted. So that's it for today's show. It would make my day to hear from any of you guys about your experience figuring out your sexuality, whatever it may be, or any biphobia, or, you know, whatever sexuality related phobias you may have experienced. I will leave all the links below for where you can get in touch about all of that. I just started up a Twitter for the podcast, so if that's your preferred social media to use, then you can jump on there and tweet at me. I made it basically so that if you don't want to follow, you know, all my random updates, you can get updates that are just relevant to the podcast episodes. So with that, have an amazing day, go live your best life, and I will see you next time. Bye everyone.